Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. But before I do that, here is a quote that I picked just for this episode. Although it's easy to forget sometimes, a share is not a lottery ticket, it's part ownership of a business. Peter Lynch, my good friend, founder of Arena Securities, Aleck Arena is here. First of all, we met in one of the most important, meaningful memories of my life. I was the first time that I was in Omaha, Nebraska. If you know Omaha, you know why I was there for the Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting. I met Aleck's father in an elevator, and the rest was history. First of all, this guy reads, he thinks, he's a perfect representation of what Culture Matters is about, especially for the up and comer entrepreneurs that are creating life and success. And I'm going to read this. I'm going to keep this intro going. I'm not done yet. I'm going to read a financial statement here because we're going to be talking about, or a financial disclosure here, because we're going to be talking about value investing, a business and investment theory. So, firstly, the information in this document is not personal financial product advice, or the information in this podcast is not financial product advice, and has been prepared without taking into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Arena Securities does not hold Australian financial services license and is not authorized to provide general or personal financial product advice. Before making any investment decision, you should consult a licensed financial advisor, and past performance is not indicative of future performance. And I'll continue. Aleck invests in organizations. He actually lives with his family. I met Frank and Marissa, amazing people in Western Australia. So this is a culture shock to the best degree. He sent me a book of his grandfather, The Price You Pay to Be an Australian, by Pino Gangemi. And we're going to go into that story today of this amazing family who built their own empire that I met at freaking Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting. So, God, I want to keep going, but we'll tell more stories as we go. Thanks for coming on,
Yeah,
Al.
all good. Thank you very much, Jay. And yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.
So, firstly, what is, for the lay person that's listening to this, that isn't on the investment level yet, but they're entrepreneurs, business owners, up and comers, how would you describe the type of investing that you're a part of, and people are following your knowledge around? I don't want, yeah, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, obviously, value investing is all about buying a slice of business. And the concept of value investing is obviously you're trying to buy a slice of business at a fair price. Um, there's multiple, I feel like there's multiple ways to skin a cat in value investing. You have your return on capital group, kind of, and then you have your cigar butt type investors, which maybe you've like read The Intelligent Investor and obviously securities analysis and all those types of books. So I feel like you might have come across both types of value investing, so to say. So the original type was way back with obviously Benjamin Graham started out, and you're trying to buy a company very much below its intrinsic value and you're creating a margin of safety. Another great book that you've read. And your goal is obviously in the end to have a bigger margin of safety that you can't really get hurt, even though that happens, because obviously in investing, like it obviously throws you curveballs. It's not
Mm.
all the same pitch. It's not the same company every time. They're obviously very, very different. And yeah, I mean, I think just investing is just a hard game in general. It's not easy. It's probably why the investment lessons are so sought after, and it's such an interesting thing, to be honest. Um, yeah, there's like I was thinking about it yesterday. I was driving back from the country, and I was thinking about like my investing journey and how I got started and all that. And I was can't remember if I was 11 or 12. I was actually younger. I was 10 years old,
Wow.
and I was in. It was an Arena family dinner. We had some relatives over from South Australia, and I was just aboard like 10-year-old Jay. Honestly, just grabbed my dad's phone, and I saw like the Apple Stocks app. So I saw the Apple Stocks app on his phone, and I was like, obviously my grandparents always were talking about like property, land, business, because they were like both my grandparents, they both run their own businesses. So business and investing was quite an interesting topic to me. And no one really liked the share market because like obviously it's a bit confusing. You have to do a lot of work around reading annual reports. They're a lot different to how they used to be. Um, your quarterly reports in America, obviously, your half year reports in Australia. You, it's really important if you're a value investor that you kind of need to understand a management team from afar.
Mm.
And obviously, because they're the ones that are managing your money and managing your capital because you're a part owner in that business. And sometimes CEOs will take massive salaries and that, and you just got to kind of get your head around the management team. Do you like them? Do you think they're worth what they're getting paid? Are they doing anything unusual with options? And are they jipping shareholders pretty much? But obviously, your classic example is Berkshire Hathaway with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And Warren's so upfront with his salary, and they're just so translucent, and like you just that's an extreme example of
Mm.
the share market. Well, not the share market as business at its probably its greatest. It's Berkshire's just such an interesting thing. We could go into that definitely more. But yeah, I was just trying to explain, sorry, how I got started with investing. So I grabbed my dad's phone and saw Telstra, which is an Australian telecommunications company, and it was $4. And I was really confused by this because I was like, "What's $4, Dad?" And he's like, "Oh, that's a share in a business." And I was like, "Wait, so I can buy a part of Telstra for $4?" And right then, I thought I had the bargain of a lifetime. I was like, "This is so crazy! I've got $4. I can buy shares." And then I scrolled down the list and I saw Apple. I can't remember what price it was now, but I think it was before the stock split, and it was about $100. And I was like, oh, like I thought Apple was an amazing company because I was just thinking from a very basic perspective. Obviously, I'm a 10-year-old kid. I'm not there sitting looking at return on capital and the numbers. I'm kind of scuttlebutting. I just know like I didn't know it at the time, but I'm like, my iPad's insane. All my parents have got these iPhones. Like, I really believe in Apple. I think their computers are the simplest to use as a kid back then. So I thought I just really liked Apple as the company. And obviously I saw Google on the like
Mm.
I was just taken by the concept that you could buy shares in a business. And yeah, I pretty much was bugging my dad to buy shares from that day. And he laughed at me. It was like, what money are you going to buy shares with? And I was like, I don't know why, but I was like a dog with a bone. Like I remember just walking out of the house, the orchard that night, and I was like, "Dad, can I buy some shares?" And he's just like, "What?" He just was so confused. And the my parents had to start up a family trust for us because me and my brother we ended up buying a few shares, and that was a very complicated process, lots of paperwork and all that because you got two underage kids buying share, well, not buying shares. Obviously, our parents were helping us like run the process, and obviously my dad was well, we were investing, so there wasn't much trading. But dad was placing the orders for me, and yeah, it was pretty interesting stuff. Like the first time we had our initial pool of capital, I remember us sitting in the office and dad giving us the run through on a few stocks, and yeah, I was taken by a few of them. There was a few that I really liked, a few that I was skeptical about, and I learned some really weird lessons. I feel like most people, when they start investing, they always hear about the speculative share and they go run off and try to buy some mining company that's probably never going to produce anything. But I should have said that. I live in Western Australia. Yeah. So they go like a speculative biomed company or something like that. And dad was obviously, dad never read half yearly reports or all that, but he just had read parts of like Warren's, he'd read parts of like Warren's books and all that, and he'd come across Warren Buffett and thought he was obviously really interesting. And he just subscribed to the Motley Fool, which is
Mm.
the Motley Fool Australia. So you guys have the American organization, and that probably was a bit helpful at the time on keeping me on the right path, I feel, because he said like, well, this is Warren Buffett, this is what he's done, this is a bit about him. He handed me an article that the Motley Fool had written about Warren Buffett, and I was like, yeah, that's cool. But you're an 11-year-old kid. Do you really understand? Like, you can't really. The concept of value investing's not an easy one to grasp for a kid. You're more just thinking about the like real basics, like the products. Do you like the products?
Mm.
Do you kind of think the mark like it's a reasonable valuation for the amount of cash flow you're getting? Because yeah, I would occasionally go look at like stuff like when I was really younger, you're obviously looking at PEs and historical earnings. Um, so yeah, I was looking at that stuff, and that's how I kind of got started. And I kind of regret starting the way I did because I never learnt any like big lessons of that biotechs are terrible or speculative mining companies are terrible. Because like the first shares I bought were Telstra, Woolworths, Sol Patterson, um, Amcom, and I have the papers in the cupboard, but that was pretty much it.
And why
So
those
Woolworths
companies?
is a I'll just run you through pretty much. Woolworths is a duopoly. It's like a grocery store. So there's Coles and Woolworths in Australia. So if we go to buy our groceries, there's like two big players, and they have pretty much the whole market. Then there's a small third-party operator, which is IGA, and obviously they had the whole market sewed up. Australians like overpaying for groceries, so compared to Americans, it's a more competitive environment in America. So obviously, when I went to America this year, that's kind of spun me out a bit because there's a few things
Mm.
that are a bit different. Um, but yeah, I was looking at Woolworths, and obviously Coles wasn't listed at the time. Coles was in Wesfarmers, which is a big Western Australian company, and that's kind of like a listed private equity group. And I never ended up buying Wesfarmers, but they had they've got this retail store inside Wesfarmers, which is called Bunnings. I'm just trying to work out how I explain this to you. It's pretty much like your one-stop shop for any materials home hardware store. Everyone loves it. They've got one small competitor, which is Mitre 10. So pretty much Woolworths tried to replicate Bunnings. They made this hardware store called Masters. And Bunnings pretty much had their business model down pat, and it was quite clear. And they'd been in Australia for a long time. They'd expanded. Bunnings was all around Australia, and like they sell hot dogs at the front on a Sunday morning for
Wow.
charity and all that. So everyone needs to go down. It's like a cultural thing in Australia. If the hot dog
Really?
store's there on a Sunday morning, everyone has to hit the hot dog store up, no matter what charity it's for. And so everyone like loves going to Bunnings. It's like I can't.
Like a
It's like a
phenomenon.
struggle.
Like
Yeah, it
a
actually is. Like you would be if you came to Australia and went to a Bunnings, you would actually be shocked. You'd be really confused. You would be like, "What's going on here? Why does everyone love this little hardware store?" Or they're big hardware stores, but you can buy most of your basic hardware needs there. And I kind of, it's just a culture thing, to be honest,
so
mate.
so
I
let's
feel.
unpack that then. Based on what I've learned from this from you so far, value investing, number one, the price that we pay is their
Okay.
value, is their margin there. And number two,
Yeah.
you talked about the management. So in the if we talk about this, you said Bunnings, is
Yeah.
that
So Bunnings was tied up into Wesfarmers, which is a Western Australia conglomerate. They at the time had Coles inside Wesfarmers, and they had Bunnings and a few other things. And it was a very interesting business. They then split out Coles, so they listed Coles privately on the stock market. So at the time, Woolworths was the only grocery provider I could actually buy. So that's why I bought Woolworths because people, from my perspective as a child, I thought people always need to eat.
Mm.
I hadn't really developed much of opinion on masters. Looking back at it, hindsight's just a wonderful thing, Jay. Looking back at it, maybe I should have developed more of an opinion as like a 12-year-old on masters, because I didn't like Bunnings is just an amazing business. It's really well run. It's hard to try to push that around. And they had big plans, like they wanted to expand into different geographies, like internationally. And I just think expansion is such a hard thing. From if you actually go through and you look at Berkshire Hathaway, you really analyze it, and I think the brilliance is that Warren buys businesses private equity, like he buys them private and takes them private, and with the capital he gets, it's not used to empire build. Like that business doesn't keep expanding. Like you have to have a smart way to, like if you're investing the capital at high rates, it's obviously quite smart. But sometimes you'll just expand for the sake of expanding and the sake of empire building because everyone constantly wants to be bigger and better and all that. And sometimes I honestly think expansion is a terrible idea. You're just better off paying out dividends or doing share
Mm.
buybacks. Share buybacks are really rare in Australia because of our tax situation. So obviously, Berkshire's really lucky is in they don't have franking credits, so they bought back they buy back a fair proportion of their stock and they get that at high rates of return. So it's quite a, it's, yeah, I just think like people always try to empire build. And for instance, you get a business that wants to expand to America or to the UK because obviously they're English speaking geographies, us being down in Australia. And America's a long way away for us, mate. We're, like, could you imagine running a Culture Matters business? You're running it in America and you just want to start up shop. You want to start up a shop in Western Australia and you're not there. It's so hard. You're not there physically running it. And if you're a co-founder or something, that's one of your main edges and your main competitive advantages is that you're running the business, you're running it well, you have standards of how you want the business to be run. And now you're expanding into Western Australia. You've got no one here. You're just relying on your
Well, I got
staff
you.
members. Well,
I'm
I
just teasing.
suppose you do.
Yeah.
But would you trust me with building out Culture Matters in Western Australia?
I'm still getting to know
I'm
you,
not
buddy.
sure.
You
Yeah,
know, in a lot
you'd
of
have to
ways,
spend a lot more time with me.
yeah, yeah. No, well, what's your point? Because I got excited and I thought it was funny. I don't want to throw you off your thought. So just to let me make sure I follow you here for the audience. It's not as much in value investing and investing the way you see it. It's not just what you make, it's what you keep. So in the context of a business, sometimes it's better to be self-aware enough to say, okay, maybe
Yeah.
we want to give a distribution. Maybe we want to buy shares back and not just expand for expansion's sake. Is that what you're saying?
Expansion sake, yes, because it's kind of set up as companies are kind of incentivized wrong. CEOs and board members and all that are incentivized to always keep expanding and keep pretty much empire building. And sometimes, like, it's not, they're playing with shareholders' money. So sometimes they don't have their own money on the line, and that's a big thing. And the board, all the shareholders might just be looking at it from the perspective of we just, like, if we expand and this works out well, I get more shares. Like, I get options and I make more money. So it works better for them. Where obviously Warren and Charlie were never, like, for themselves personally, they didn't have options and all that. Warren got paid his $100,000 wage,
Wow.
has not changed to this day, and that's just how he went about. That's how he went about life. And the brilliance of Berkshire Hathaway is that he was able to convince people and get people to buy in to his mentality, and I think that is insanely hard to do because he's convinced founding families and all that. He's bought the business out, but then he's like, oh, it's better that you give the money back to Berkshire and I'll buy back stock or I'll give it to a business over here that needs more because they can invest at a higher return on capital. And that's that's just brilliant in itself. Like I don't no one else that's very hard to do. I don't think many other people could do that.
What
It's
about
literally just
him?
one big team.
What about
What
him?
about him?
Yeah, what about him? Do you think we can learn from of how he was able to accomplish that in your estimation?
I think you can learn obviously a fair bit from Warren, and that he kind of you can kind of see the shift in value investing, how we originally thought it through Warren, obviously. So he learnt from Ben Graham of buying stuff really, really cheap. And then they obviously couldn't scale their investing. Well, you got to kind of go back to Geico because Geico is the engine room of that business from my perspective, of that they get the float in really cheap. And then obviously you can invest the float eventually. And when no other company has that advantage of a big insurance business being behind you, you're investing the float. It's actually very ironic because when he was really young, he wrote an article that was the stock I like most, and he wrote it to be Geico. And it's quite ironic that, it's so far out of Ben Graham's ways of
Mm.
from everything they taught us, they shouldn't have bought Geico. Like Ben Graham never should have bought Geico because it wasn't a value invest, it wasn't thought of to be a value investment back then. It was really more of a, like, I don't want to say a growth stock, but it was more of a growth company. And like maybe that changed something between the few of them there, looking at maybe
Mm.
it changed their perspective on value investing. Um, Obviously, Warren ended up buying it out whole, which not many other companies can do. But the float does a lot for Berkshire Hathaway,
What's
and
float
that's a main part.
for people that don't know, what's float?
So obviously, when you're insuring something, and you have, geez, this is, I should be able to explain this, but so you're insuring, let's say, like they'll insure events like March Madness and all that. For an
Wow.
Australian listener, like they'll insure the grand final going ahead, like the AFL grand final. And obviously, let's say once in 100 years you get hit by an event like COVID, they have to pay money out, but they'll insure it for insane amount of money. And if it doesn't go ahead, they have to pay it out. But there's obviously there's a risk reward to it, and Berkshire needs to get paid for insuring it. So then it's also how they go to writing insurance because most insurance companies, their margins get slim because they're competing with each other all the time.
Okay.
And it's an incentivization thing pretty much again, because Warren turns around and goes, well, I don't want you I don't want you trimming our margins and making pretty much dumb bets. I want you to think about this. Like, obviously, this is what he says to Geico. I want you to think about this and be realistic with what you're insuring. And no other company, no other big insurance company has the advantage of doing that. So, yeah, that kind of gets back to the engine room of what Geico is. And obviously, insurance, if you can run an insurance business the way that Berkshire Hathaway has through Geico, it's insane. But I think it
So
would be very hard to buy. If you were trying to buy a big insurance company, private equity, you'd have to change a lot of the culture. And yeah, I don't think it's really just it's a Geico thing. And maybe if you look at the stock market, you have other companies like Markel and that, like they're obviously they kind of think in a similar means to how Warren Buffett does with Geico. So yeah.
so float is the money that's accrued from those
So
premiums,
yeah,
and
yes, pretty
they're
much.
investing it.
Yeah, so obviously, if the event can go wrong, you obviously need a certain proportion of float. So they'll go and put that into like low risk bonds and all that. And then let's say the event never happens, like
Yeah,
March Madness doesn't get cancelled. So they then get to keep that money that the person paid them,
yeah.
and then they can invest that into whatever they want pretty much. So there's a whole,
And
that's a really big proportion.
they invested. They bought businesses privately.
Yeah, they bought
And
Geico privately. Yeah, so there's no Geico. That Geico was a listed company, and there was really sorry I actually forgot. There was a guy running the float originally, and Warren really respected him, and he was a very good investor. Sorry, just give me 2 seconds because I've got he had like letters and stuff, and I've got them saved on my phone.
oh yeah, didn't he
Uh,
pass away?
oh, probably, but I remember reading his 80s letters, and that was very interesting stuff. About just I'll see if I still have it on my phone. Yeah, Geico's equity investment approach. I can send it to you now, but yeah, it's definitely interesting stuff through the 80s and all that, and how he was obviously thinking, and
Why was
Lou
Geico
Simpson's
not?
letters.
Why was
So
Geico?
that's how.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you go, sorry. Oh no, I was just like, Geico was pretty much run. It's been run well for a while, and Lou Simpson was
Oh, Lou.
a
Is that?
very, yeah, he was the pretty much the capital allocator inside Geico before Warren came about, that could invest float obviously really sensibly and at pretty good rates of return.
Why was Geico not a value stock, a value investment stock?
Because it wasn't dying. We'll play it real simple. It wasn't a dying business. It's it wasn't below NTA. On a multiple, I remember when they bought it, it was really cheap. It was probably like 4 times earnings. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, it was quite cheap. But it wasn't a dying business, and it wasn't a cash box, so the business didn't have more money inside of it than it was worth on a market cap perspective. So like a market cap meaning if you got the whole bit, if you added up all the shares,
Okay.
and obviously like if you added up all the shares, that would be the whole business's value. So if you did that, there wasn't as much cash as the market cap. Like they have that on the sidelines, obviously. So it wasn't.
So the market cap would have to be lower than the amount of cash in the business, or
Yes, that's
liquidity.
what they were trying to go for. They were going for a dying business, and then like Warren's perspective of value investing really changes when he buys out a business in. He pretty much takes an activist stake in a business in Nebraska. I don't know Nebraska that well, obviously. I've never lived in America, but it's not in Omaha. It's in another major town
Isn't
in
it Seas
Nebraska.
Candy?
No, that's not Seas Camp. It's another. It's like a industrial business in Nebraska in a different town, and he pretty much fires most of the staff and does. He fires most of the staff, and it doesn't turn like it becomes quite a political thing for him then, because he had a fair bit of money and he didn't need to do that, but he's thinking from an investment perspective that if he slims down the team, obviously they're more productive and all that. He's come in and thinking it from a business ownership perspective, but then he's got a decent amount of money at that young age, and he's then people are driving from that other town to Omaha,
Hmm.
and he's copying like a pretty much abuse to say, and that obviously didn't feel too good on his side. So then the perspective of the second kind of stage of value investing came about, which was if you buy a really good brand, obviously with high rates of return, like on capital. So this is like the Coca-Cola stage, the Gillette stage, that they're pretty simple businesses with a big brand and they can expand. And obviously it's quite a simple expansion. And like obviously everyone in America loves Coca-Cola, so everyone overseas would most likely love Coca-Cola, and the demand for shavers in Gillette is pretty high, and we're probably all going to need to shave more. It's a growth trajectory as the human population is getting bigger. Everyone's going to need to shave, so they worked out. But that was more of a Charlie Munger thing to Warren Buffett, as in he's come along and said, "Well, Warren, we can't keep expanding, buying not very good businesses at very good prices,
Hmm.
because you can't, because the businesses are shrinking, because the businesses are dying. You can't own 5 or 10% of it, because then they have lots of money, so it's hard for them to get a return. So if you have a bigger pool of money, you need to go for businesses that have can have high returns on capital. So then you're going for stuff like Coca-Cola, like Gillette, and that's how value investing kind of changed. So obviously they deemed those businesses to have a competitive advantage, which was sustainable. That's kind of how the term of a moat came around. If you go through the Berkshire Hathaway meetings from the 90s, like the AGMs, you'll hear them talking about Gillette and Coca-Cola, a bit about Geico to the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's, if I was a value investor starting out today, that's probably one of my starting points. I would go back to the 90s AGMs. They were very sharp back then. They still are today for their age, but there was less people in the room, Jay, to be honest.
Mm.
So they could say more too. And it's all recorded, so you can go back and listen to them. They go for about 7.5 hours each. I'm up to about the 2009 AGM, but it fiddles out after the 90s. It's fair to say. I would 90s and early 2000s a very interesting time. It's also quite interesting to see their body language in their thoughts around the year 2001. And I was, it's, yeah, because obviously the market has cycles and it's quite a just interesting thing to see, obviously, when a bull market, like you're in the late stages of the bull market and retail investors have kind of lost it a bit. And I remember one guy, I can't remember if it was 2000 or 2001, gets up there and pretty much tells them that tells Warren and Charlie that they're not that smart and they should put money into tech stocks because tech stocks are a really good investment. It's been working out really well of late. And Warren sits there and says, he doesn't really understand it. He doesn't really understand how it's priced. And he gets back to, you kind of, he just explains stuff so well and explains stuff so well to the common man too. Um, his famous quote in a Berkshire meeting was, he's trying to explain discounted cash flow and he's got to work out, he says to a person, well, we're trying to work out if we can get one bird in the hand and there's two birds in the bush, we got to work out the risk reward pretty much for it.
Interesting.
And it's quite, Australian person, Australian doctor from Melbourne gets up next and he goes, Warren, if we could get two birds in the bush in Australia, that's a bloody good thing. Because that means something different in Australia
It means
than it
something
does in
different.
America. Yeah, so yeah, he's talking about women. If that was in Australia, if you get two birds in the bush, it'd be quite good to be honest. That's what. So the Australians kind of had a good laugh about that one.
Aleck,
But yeah,
for the audience's sake, before we go even deeper here, why should the lay person, someone that has not experienced value investing, they never even heard of Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, maybe they've never even invested before, but they have money. Why should they care?
yeah, mate. I don't I don't push people into investing, and I obviously, if you're a young entrepreneur, I'm coming at this from a completely different angle. If you're a young entrepreneur and Charlie Munger says you probably want to study you want to make friends with the imminent dead. So you like want to become friends with grand business people that probably are on this world today. But if you go through and read their autobiographies and stuff, you're going to pick up a few lessons. And if they're obviously they've been through most of it before, they're a fair bit smarter than you. So it's kind of like Kobe Bryant sitting there and studying film. Like he's sitting there, he's watching game tape of Michael Jordan, and he knows when someone's moving left, X is moving right. When he's at the top of the key, he's going to do a rip through. And it's exactly like Kobe Bryant basing his game around Michael Jordan. Some people that don't know a lot about basketball might be a bit confused by it, but it's the same as maybe a young computer entrepreneur looking and watching Bill Gates and watching most of his every moves. And I think Charlie Munger is definitely one of the greatest. I really rate Charlie Munger. He's been through a lot for his life and he shows a lot of hardship, obviously. And if you go back to Charlie Munger's early days, obviously was involved in a world war, pretty much talks about a margin of safety when he was trying to work out the weather forecasts. He goes through and he's like, well, how can I kill the pilots? Because he's trying to work out his job was the weather forecast and all that. And he doesn't want to kill the pilots. So he does it in reverse. And it kind of shows their thinking of a reverse discounted cash flow. So, like that, a normal discounted cash flow is like you're trying to work out what the investment's worth. But a reverse discounted cash flow is you're trying to work out what the market's actually pricing the stock at today. So
Hmm.
Charlie Munger's theory kind of, I don't know if it came from how can I kill the pilots in the World War, pretty much, but he worked out, well, obviously I don't want to kill the people I'm in charge of. So let's de-risk this and go through and figure out what all the risks are. And he understood that really well. And it obviously helped him in the war. And yeah, he's a very interesting man. Also with his son Teddy, sadly passed away when he was about 10 years old. If you read Poor Charlie's Almanac and a bit about his life story, he talks about like he didn't have enough money to get him the best. His son had bone marrow cancer. He didn't have enough money to get him the best treatment and all that. And it was a big weight of his marriage, and it was a hard time for Charlie, and it really put his life into perspective of that he needs to get his family the best healthcare. He felt really, really helpless, and it shows a lot of hardship, and he talks about walking through the streets, crying and sobbing, and I think it's quite touching and all that, and it shows a different side to him. And then he obviously, I got to come back to the question here, but I think if you're studying Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and all that, well, I think most people should study Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger because of what they know in business and what they've been through in business. And obviously, Warren Buffett, within what the American society's pushed on him, that he's need to help, like he's had to help out with bailing out banks and doing all kinds of things. But I think everyone should should study past greats because you can probably learn something from most people, to be honest. So it's
Hmm.
not really, I don't really want to push anyone into investing, but Charlie Munger can teach most people a fair bit about life. He's obviously a lot older than us. He's been through a lot more. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have seen the depths of the Great Depression. That's when they grew up. They talk about obviously work ethic, and Charlie talks about working at Warren's uh like the family grocery candy store and all that. And Charlie reckons he was just working there for the fun of it, pretty much to get experience, and Warren reckons he was working there for money. But I don't, I kind of found that a bit funny because it kind of gets back to Charlie Munger's just he's got a very different approach on life that Warren Buffett does. Obviously they're really good mates. But Charlie Munger like talks about like he thinks enough's enough at certain points, and he tells you that things in life are important. Like obviously Warren Buffett, amazing investor, but he will just kind of not he will he's always studying and always trying to hone his craft, and obviously very excited to go to work every day. And Charlie Munger is amazing too, but he would obviously go, well, I want to spend time with my wife, my kids, my grandchildren. And I feel like because of Teddy, it happened to him at such a young age. It kind of shaped his life,
Wow.
and he was like, I have to get enough money to make my family comfortable, and I'm just going to be a really like decent person. And like he didn't need to write Poor Charlie's Almanac, there was no need for any of them to go write the books and all that they wrote. And yeah, so they've done a bit for society that they obviously didn't need. And Charlie talks about helping out dyslexic children and thinking it's the biggest disadvantage that kids can't read in the modern day society, and that's just frankly unfair. And obviously, he's tried to help um, lots of dyslexic children before, and he tries to help where they obviously both are quite charitable guys. As in, Charlie's donated most of his wealth throughout his time, and Warren obviously is going to donate all of his wealth at the end. And yeah,
At 11 years old, did you think that you'd
yeah,
be doing what you're doing today, making this
no,
your career?
no, I
And
did
you're
not
what,
think that at
21?
all.
You're 21?
I'm 20 at the moment.
Yeah, just to put that in perspective for the listeners, you have the award of the youngest guest ever in history, and I hope that that's not going to be for long because we were not ageists here. We need more future billionaires on the podcast. So what were you thinking then, and why not? Why weren't you thinking that you'd
I
be?
just wanted to buy. I wanted to buy assets. Because I believed in assets and I'd seen what they'd done in the past. I was having obviously again I was having a look at history and I found it pretty interesting, Jay, to be honest. I always kind of when I was a kid, I kind of always thought the world wars were very interesting to like obviously very sad but very interesting. Um, I thought history was quite interesting. I remember like yesterday, year 8 economics, it was an optional subject at my high school. And I remember sitting there and we're going through bubbles and euphoric times and we're learning about the stock market. And in year 8, I very much took to it. My teacher knew a fair bit about the stock market. He kind of reintroduced me to Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. So like I remember coming in one day, sitting down for class, and he had like a PowerPoint presentation, and there's the intelligent investor on the PowerPoint presentation, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, and he was pretty much into this. He was into the stock market. Lived a tiny bit in America. Definitely quite an interesting bloke. And he told us like about. I just remember tulips was just such an interesting thing. That if you go back and you look at the Dutch tulip bulb bubble, there's also like the South Sea bubble. There's obviously the 1929 stock market crash. We kind of looked at all of these periods of it's kind of human psychology, to be honest, Jay.
Mm.
And there's in all the cases of bubbles, there's a lack of cash flow, and there's people seeing their neighbors getting rich off something stupid and piling in just because their neighbor got rich, and there's a fear of missing out, and there's not much. Humans are a semi-smart species, I kind of think, and there's not much mental capacity going into these investments. And I remember his grandmother had a stock certificate. His great grandmother had a stock certificate from I think 1928, 1929, and he gave us all a copy of the stock certificate. The
Wow.
stock was worth nothing in the end, but it was very interesting to see. Like obviously, stock certificate from back then, not much thought was involved in the investment process at all. There was no what's a bird in the bush worth for one in the hand. No one was sitting back there. They were looking, well, my neighbor got rich off this stock. It's gone up so much. Like it's gone up 20% in a week. It must go up 20% next week. And yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. That can't happen for too long.
How
Um,
would one go about starting to research companies in your estimation, make choices around how they want to grow their uh, active education, let's
knowledge.
say,
Yeah.
taking action in this capacity for,
Yeah.
let's say,
I
the,
reckon
yeah.
I reckon the Peter Lynch books are just an amazing starting position. Obviously, they simplize it, they make it pretty fun. I feel like we have a tendency to overcomplicate investing. Um, everyone loves the numbers, and there's a few ways you can get an edge in investing, but pretty much everyone has the numbers, Jay. So if you're just looking at it as, I think this stock's insanely cheap, you have to have an insight or another perspective if it's going to be a winning investment. So, how do I explain? So pretty much, I'm just trying to work out how to explain this. If you go back and look at coal stocks in 2020, there was obviously an underinvestment in the space because of ESG reasons, like environmental, social governance reasons that everyone hates coal. Um, obviously there's still demand for it. It's impossible to get a new mine approved and all that. So it's very much an unloved space, and the share market the share market can be quite an irrational place. It's very interesting if you look at the share market, you pretty much have to pick apart price, and price doesn't really mean that. It means a lot, but the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay sane. I'm pretty sure that's a Beth Graham quote, but it's really, really true. So obviously, you could pick up coal companies at less than their assets were worth. Obviously, some cyclicals have their time in the sun. No one really knows when that was going to be, but they had a favorable turns in the Russian-Ukraine war came through. There was a lack of natural gas supply into Europe. European countries had to start shipping the highest grade Australian coal from Australia to Europe. And obviously, then Asian countries like Japan, India, China, Indonesia, well, like they have to start. Sorry, I'll just re explain this. um, Countries like Japan and India have to buy coal for their coal power terminals. Obviously, Japan doesn't have much coal. So then Japan starts bidding for the same coal that Europe's bidding for. So obviously, that's a good fundamental driver for the price. And then the coal companies start absolutely printing money. They have tons of free cash, and the market has priced them if that was never going to happen, and as if it was just going to die. All the coal companies were going to die. So there was a with that whole investment thesis. There's if you've taken that whole thing out of the price, you can see that the common man's just sitting there thinking, coal's dead, lithium's the we're just green hydrogen's the future of the world. We don't need baseload power. There's not much actual fundamental thought there. Like you're going to need baseload power in the future. Solar panels are cool and all that, but I don't know about you. The sun in Australia doesn't shine at nighttime.
So let me get this straight. So in that case, macro uh conflicts can lead to crowd psychology to make
Kind
irrational
of, yes.
decisions based
Yes.
on based on current politics. So for example, if we have this idealism, maybe in the future everything will be green.
Yes.
When things
It's
go bad,
we've got very idealistic and we forget that, oh no, we do need coal. We need coal so we can turn on the lights at nighttime. Where's the baseload power going to come from? Obviously, most countries don't like using nuclear power. So what are we really left with? You can't just obviously you have to think about it. And
so in
some
that
people,
case, in that case, the share price could go from $50 to $10, and you're saying you'd want to buy it at 10.
yeah,
So
AMRs. There's an American company you can Google it. It's AMR. It's traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And
okay.
I was really interesting. I was actually in the after the Berkshire meeting. There's the Markel brunch, and I ran into Monish Pabrai, which is
He's great, that guy.
one of yeah, he's maybe let's say he's one of the world's best investors. And I said, "Hey Monish, how you going?" And I think he was a bit confused with the accent, a few other things. And I was talking to him about the coal thesis of these companies are really cashed up. They trade really cheap on a free cash flow measurement to all the other companies. Obviously, they will die off one day, but for the moment, they're making a lot of money. I said, well, there's like a company that's trading on like one times. It was on like a P of one, which doesn't happen these days anymore. It was in America, and they were just buying back shares hand over fist. It was insane how many shares they were buying back. And he like looked a bit confused and said, "Nah, that's impossible." And then I don't know. Obviously, I reckon he's probably forgot what I've said. But in his next quarterly, he'd pretty much flipped his portfolio and bought a lot of that stock, and he bought a lot of a coal stock that I'd never heard of before. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Wow.
There's a time and a place for cyclicals. I can't predict the future, so I got no clue if it's that time or that place. And obviously, cost reduction is pretty important with mining, and I'm probably not the best person to be talking about mining with. But if you go back, I can try to explain the wisdom of crowds, so to say, at the start of this year. We obviously had a banking crisis in the world. So any bank stocks, everyone was throwing the bank stocks out the window. There's a fair few bank stocks. If you look through their balance sheet, they're probably not going to go broke, Jay. So the Australian banks are backed by the government pretty much. And sorry, can we just pause it for a second? So obviously, at the start of the year, we had a banking crisis in the world, led by Silicon Valley Bank in America. So the Americans pretty much always stuffing up the world, you know.
I am aware. We're
So
aware. We're aware. Yeah.
yeah. So we had a banking crisis, and Deutsche and Credit Suisse have looked a bit weak since the global financial crisis way back in the day. So it was pretty well known that unless Credit Suisse was in trouble, um, and it was really interesting because obviously most of the bank stocks absolutely dumped. And I was looking at obviously from an investment perspective again, and there's a small investment bank in Australia. Its name currently is May Financial, but it's the old Moelis Australia Group. So Moelis, that's an investment banker in America. He gave Australian investment banker a bunch of money to start up his own investment bank. The guy's name is Andrew Pridham. He was actually supposed to be retired. He's on the board of the Sydney Swans, which is a AFL. I've definitely lost you here.
No, I
It's
got you.
a big AFL, like an Australian rules football team,
Okay.
kind of like the New England Patriots. So it's like
Plenty of
yeah,
fans
it's
listening.
kind of like, so AFL fans are like, obviously AFL is probably the best sport in the world, you know. So he's on the board of the Sydney Swans, helps out a lot there, but also he's got his own. He stepped off He's not the chief executive officer at the company anymore, but he's let his two successors take over pretty much. And it was a really low market cap stock. Liquidity was poor, and liquidity in the bank stocks became very dry. So everyone wants to get out at once. So everyone's trying to rush to the exit because the contagion, the fear of just because one bank's going to go broke, the rest of them are also going to go broke. People kind of stop thinking and become really emotional thinkers. So I knew the stock really well. Obviously bought a fair bit of the stock and did quite well. But the thinking there was
Really?
obviously
Wow.
I don't think I don't think Credit Suisse going broke, it could affect a lot of things. I remember there was a debate over there was a lot of people holding like hybrid Credit Suisse bonds, and people were trying to work out who actually held the bonds and what the flow and effect was. Because if the bonds became worthless because UBS bought out Credit Suisse because the government pretty much told UBS, you have to go buy this out. And UBS then said, well, we're paying nothing for the hybrid bonds, we're just paying the company. So a lot of firms like Oaktree, Howard Marks
Oh
company
yeah, love it.
had, yeah, oh yeah, okay.
We got to talk about
a
that.
lot of people, a lot of people had bonds in the company and well, like hybrid bonds, and people were worried about who actually held the hybrid bonds because if a financial organization was too leveraged on just those hybrid bonds, it could have been quite a downward effect. And then obviously you're worried about a flow-on effect
What
of
what
who
is it?
then
What is it?
you're worried about a flow-on effect. So if I'm just like saying, if let's say a financial organization owns too many of those Credit Suisse bonds and they're
Okay.
not in a stable condition themselves, you're worried about the next financial organization going broke. So
And
that was
and
kind of the contagion, the fear of all that.
is the
And
idea that the
there
fear of
was,
contagion would then lead to a general exit of the populace in that sector so that there are actual banks with strong balance sheets, with good
there definitely
cultures,
was.
with good
Yeah.
cultures that are basically going to go down in price just
Yeah.
because the overall sector is losing liquidity. Is that the
Yes.
idea? And so you
And
need to be
yes, exactly. And at that time, you were pretty much getting paid to be the liquidity. So you were getting pretty much, because I was going, this is way below its intrinsic value from my eyes. So I was then getting paid an extra percentage. Well, I thought I was getting paid, and in the end, I did I was getting paid to be the liquidity, the person buying the shares in an illiquid company that everyone wants to get out of because a bank in America went broke.
And why were you getting
So
paid? Because you own shares in one of in
no,
one.
I was getting paid because I was buying shares from people that were scared and like
Ah,
wanted to get out. And there was like a because everyone wants to get out at the same time, it creates a pretty steep drawdown. And it happened across the board, like in the banking sector. Like banks got marked down across the board. Everyone was scared, fearful. It was just quick risk off. But I thought, obviously, the central bank in America, the Federal Reserve, did quite a decent job in
how
stabilizing
important
things. And
how important is it to be contrarian or open to looking at the other side of the crowd?
pretty much the it's pretty much in the investment market. It's the main. Usually, the wisdom of crowds is terrible. You pretty much usually have to be contrarian to make money. If you're buying a stock when everyone loves it, usually that's the time where you should be fearful. Sometimes it will work out in your favor, but if everyone loves the stock and it's priced to perfection, like I don't really want to get stock specific. There's if you're buying a stock at like 100 times earnings or 120 times earnings with when you can get a risk-free rate like money in the bank at like 4%, and everyone loves the stock and the media is absolutely
Uh,
loving it, it's probably a bit of a scary situation in reality because it's just got so everyone loves it and it's
let
hard
me
for
make
them to
sure I
beat
follow
expectations.
for the audience. So
Yeah.
4% return would be like price earnings of 25, right? Because
I
25
would more want
times
if
four.
you could get a 4% return, I would more want at the moment you'd more want a P of probably 16, 17. But that's you can't just rely on P's in investing because everyone obviously loves the P ratio, but there's a lot more to a stock and to a company than the P ratio. You've got management, you've got past cash flows, you've got future cash flows, you're trying to work out if they have a competitive advantage that's sustainable and they can build upon. So that's like a moat, as in Buffett describes. It's obviously like the water around the castle. No one can jump in and knock the leader off. So a company with a big moat would probably be like obviously Coca-Cola. Um, you could say the technological companies, like technology companies, usually quite hard, as in technology advances so quickly. It's kind of hard to work out if a company has a moat or not. So who knows what we're going to produce tomorrow and what we're going to need tomorrow. So that's kind of it's very hard to work out if a company. I don't have like any great examples, but yeah, so we might need to cut this bit out. Sorry, Jay, but
No, I follow you
there's just
totally.
hard, like I don't want to say in a video or yeah, there's you would obviously need to cut out like
It, it, the banking people are leaving the banking sector. You were running in, so everyone's running out of the building. You were like a
yeah.
firefighter.
I was running into things that I'd done the work on before. So obviously in investment markets, it's very important that you have done the work beforehand. So when a crisis hits or a crisis hits in a specific sector, you know that X, Y, and Z isn't those variables aren't going to affect this stock in the long term. And it's probably only going to affect the share price, which is often very irrational. And Warren Buffett obviously explains the share market as that drunk uncle. He has drastic mood swings. He can he flings things up and down. And obviously, if you're getting quotes every day from a drunk uncle of yours, you're in a good position as a businessman because you can pick: is today a smart day to sell? Is today a good day to buy because of the emotional swings in the market? And yeah, that was the time where the market they'd thrown out bank sector was like the baby with the bathwater. They just thrown it out, and no one wanted to know about the banks. No one wanted to know about investment banks. So I looked at it and went for the pretty much the lowest liquidity play on the ASX because I thought that would be the most beaten down stock out of the sector. And yeah, it definitely was in the end, and I was right there. But yeah,
And
I
so
like
that
focusing. A real smart fund manager that I know once told me that people that talk about their winners are it's people can talk about their winners as much as they like, but what have you actually learned from your losers? And it goes into a lot of depth of what have you learned from your losers. Let's be transparent. Let's go through your mistakes. A really good investor, they speak about their losers, and yeah. So obviously, I don't want to say I'm the greatest investor of all time because I'm definitely not. Um, I would love to think that I'm working towards that. Have high expectations for myself, but at a cost. I don't want to be the greatest investor of all time, have a terrible family life, and have not be the best. Obviously, I'm not a father at the moment, but I obviously want to be the best dad possible at some stage. At the moment, I want to be the best brother possible, the best son possible, the best boyfriend possible, and yeah, I don't
mm,
want to just zone everything out to be the greatest investor of all time, which I feel some of the greatest investors have. They've done this at a cost of their family, and I've seen that. And I've seen some successful people that I think Warren Buffett would describe as a failure, to be honest, because I've seen their kids don't love them. There's nothing wrong with getting a divorce. I know people change and all that, but being divorced, not having many people around you that love you. I know Warren at the end, like Warren always says, at the end of your life, money's kind of irrelevant, and you know you've won if the people you want to love you can love you. You
mm,
can't just go buy $1 million worth of happy like of love. It's just not a thing you can go buy. Um, so obviously, money's somewhat important, but to me, like I've learned from some of the great investors that you need to like obviously balance is important, and yeah, it's kind of makes sense why I'm here, like where I am today. And it makes sense. It's like, yeah, I live by that. So that's kind of comes back to your point of way before when you said like, why should people study Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, and why should people get into investing? And I just kind of said, well, I think people should study Warren and Charlie because they're like grandfather figures, and I suppose grandfathers are amazing. Obviously, I have two great grandfathers, but if I can learn more from other people, yeah, obviously one wrote a book and um, I'm extremely proud of him, and it really gives me it really he's obviously been all both grandfathers and both my all my grandparents have been through hard times. They to get to Australia was a hard thing for them, and if you're having a bad day or any of that, obviously in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not that bad. There's people in life that are having a lot worse of a day than you, um, and they got through it and they persisted, and they showcase persistence and hard work, what dedication can do. Um, and they all showcase family too. So that stuff I'm very proud of. I'm very proud to be who I am.
do you think that there's a connection between those values and some of the strong managements that you come across?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, do you think there's a connection between the values that the strong family values, the history that you were you've been blessed with, and the managements that you've come across that have been
Some, yeah, well, I
stressful?
try to obviously you take stuff with a grain of salt, especially in the share market, and obviously CEOs would be telling you that their company is the best company in the world, and you got to try to factor out some people are just promoters in the share market, and obviously you want to stay away from that. I do like a family-run business. Obviously, I like businesses with high insider ownership. So if the or if the company's earnings perform poorly, um, the the stock price usually, like there's a direct call. People think it's uncorrelated. Over the long term, if the company's earnings increase, the company's share price will pretty much always increase unless you bought it on a very irrational valuation. There's a direct correlation between the share price and between the earnings. And if the earnings are top left, bottom right, if they're going up and they're going in the right direction, then the share price will just kind of take care of itself in the long term.
Mm.
So I do like to see, and it comes really, incentivization structure is huge, and it comes back to that as in, is the management incentivized to dilute shareholders, or is the management incentivized to grow the earnings because they own half of the stock? If the management owns one person that's the founder and runs the business on a day-to-day basis, he owns half the stock, and let's say his family reputation is on the line too, I think he's going to want to perform well because one, it's good for his net worth, it's good for his family legacy, and I found most people want to honor their family legacy and not stuff up their family business, because I've seen a few on the share market, and usually they're trying their hardest to perform on a day-to-day basis and do all the right
Mhm.
things.
What was your biggest lesson in the first 5 years of investing?
From when I was like 12 to 17,
Yeah.
um, obviously I kind of worked out. So it comes back to Woolworths and Masters and all that. That I somehow lost money on the duopoly supermarket play because they went into warehouse. They became a competitor to Bunnings, which is obviously a big warehouse business in Australia. Um, and I learned a bit about expansion and trusting management if I look back on it. Because management, again, in that case, instead of spending all that money, that all they did is pretty much strengthen Bunnings but they went broke, Masters. So Bunnings went and picked off which sites they wanted because they built the infrastructure for them, and then they just picked off which sites they wanted, which were the highest profitable stores, and the ones they couldn't sell, they couldn't sell. So they were left in a terrible position. They bit off more than they could chew. So it comes back to incentivization, learning about who's allocating the capital, obviously in the company, having trust in them, learning that expansion's not always the best thing. So maybe in Woolworth's sake, they just should have paid out dividends and done share buybacks. Um, that's definitely something I learned.
Who
Um,
should be allocating the capital in the company?
that's a hard question, Jay. There's no right answer there, but it's always like the management, the board, the CEOs. They're having a vote on where they think the best place is to allocate the company's capital. Um, it's just you have to really believe in management. So if you've got a management team you like and you respect, you're obviously halfway there. But with investing, you can buy a share for like and hold it for 10 years. And originally you bought into someone's management team, and that management team can change halfway through your holding period or halfway like, so you have to constantly update yourself, inform yourself of management. And I don't think going to meet CEOs is the smartest idea when you're an investor, because they're just going to tell you what you want to hear, especially if they're a professional CEO. If they're a little founder, they're usually a bit more untouched, kind of just say it how it is and all that, which you prefer to hear. But yeah, when you're talking to management teams, you have to take the whole thing with a grain of salt and just, I don't, it's not a thing I really like doing, to be honest. I would rather talk to employees at the company to get more of a feel, and then they usually will tell you about competitors, stuff that they think's going wrong or right. So yeah, usually I'm not trying to go talk to the CEO. I'm running around trying to talk to employees or is yeah, that's I'm trying to talk to. I just don't, frankly, I just don't really want to hear the bullshit, to be honest. I just want to work out what the facts are. You obviously trying to work out how the dollar. Buffett talks about the concept of working out if you give the business a dollar, like you buy their product, how that dollar flows through the business, what hits bottom line, what's top line, what are the expenses, Like obviously trying to work out what are the profit margins, but it can get complicated as in like, is there an inventory cost of they're having to warehouse goods and services? Is that a variable cost? Sorry, they're having to
Mm.
warehouse goods, and that can be a variable cost, obviously, if they're how long are they holding the product in the warehouse? There's all kinds of things with just investing in general. There's all kinds of variables.
So the managements are generally figuring out what to do with the money, and there's a tension between um that process because what would make them qualify to do so?
Yeah, well, obviously that's the board and all that has to. Oh, like they agree on the CEO, and that's how companies are made. Like there is a process to hiring someone, but then obviously if he's the best person for the shareholders or not is another it's another thing entirely. Yeah, this I definitely would put a big emphasis on management, and it's kind of a hard thing to explain because obviously when you run your own business privately, you know who management are. It's for culture matters. It's you. Something goes wrong, it kind of comes back to you and how you want to deal with it, and that's the hard thing in the share market that you're not running the business. Other people are running the business. So having trust in those other people goes a long
Well, it's
way.
interesting because you talked about incentives,
Mm,
people's value systems, what's unspoken with them, their behaviors, their behaviors below awareness. That's what makes up their character. So essentially,
uh,
we're looking at people's values.
yeah, and if
Values
people,
drive behavior, and the values are also
yeah,
influenced by the institution. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I completely agree with you. To be honest, I think the incentive structure is just a massive part of the world, and it's a thing that I think
Like if I need a
we
law, like here, let's pose this moral question, right? If I need a law to tell me not to kill you, am I a good person? Like meaning, my
probably
there's
not, Jay.
conscience and then there's
Probably not, mate.
yeah, there
Yeah, I know.
that's
So
a dramatic example, but the incentive, like there may be an incentive against me to share my thoughts because and then so for example, if there's a revolution, the people that started America, the founding fathers,
yep,
the incentives were against them. They were
yeah.
de-incentivized. So why did they do what they did? Well, it was something deeper than that. There was a conflict of visions. There was fundamentally different values that drove them against the incentives. So incentives is a piece of it, values is a piece of it. Uncovering the puzzle is
If you
understanding.
look at
Yeah, go ahead.
the world today, you kind of, I think most of the incentive structures of the whole world is there's many places where it's definitely wrong. Um, could it be better? I don't really know, but from a young person looking at it, you look at like pays of our politicians and all that kind of stuff, and you're like, well, I don't think that's exactly correct. Corporate structures, what we're incentivized to do isn't always to do good for the earth and all that. It's to do some pretty poor things sometimes. So sometimes
Mm.
people come back and go, well, why isn't this changing? And you kind of like, I'm a young person, so I don't always want to like voice my opinion and all that. But you're like, well, it clearly looks like there's been an incentivization structure that has been pushed this way over time and pushed in the wrong direction. That we kind of sometimes want to fluff and muck around and look like we're doing something without actually doing something. Um, for me, kind of the energy transition is kind of definitely one where I think it gives me a good laugh, but it's kind of sad in reality that there's all. I don't want to make fun of greenies because I'm like one for the earth too, and I love like going to the farm and doing all that stuff. But like people will not realize what they're actually doing. So you can push for solar panels and all that, but at the end of the day, solar panels and wind farms. At the end of the day, you have to manufacture those items.
Mm.
to make a wind farm, you have to dig up a lot of met coal, and then you have to burn a lot of met coal because you have to make steel. Don't think many people actually realize that. So
Mm.
at the end of the day, you're using power to obviously dig this stuff out of the ground, and then you're manufacturing and processing it, which is a pretty intensive process. And then you're putting it in an area, and then you actually, I'm not sure if we've worked out what return of power input we're actually getting. It's well in Australia. I know like where are we putting these green energy farms, and how close to certain areas are they? The payoff periods on some of them are just completely wrong with the amount of energy we're getting into the grid and how much energy we had to distribute to get that power, like the green energy farm there. It just doesn't make much sense. There's not it to me. It just looks like the politicians are going, well, right. We told the average man that we're going to make green energy. We got to somehow make this look like we're doing it somehow, and we're not still using coal to power the grid. Um, let's go make some wind farms, and let's go make some solar farms, like in random places. And yeah, there's not much thought that really goes into some stuff. To be honest, from my perspective, I feel.
I want to throw a wrench into this to pivot to part two here. So I'm reading this awesome book, The Price You Pay to Be an Australian, and I want to talk about an incentive and a value system. Your grandfather on your mother's side was incentivized to go to a convenience store to meet his future wife, Frances, because go there and wait, you ready for this? Incentivized to go and meet Frances's father to ask for the betrothal, the wedding, the approval for the wedding. So what because of the value system at the time, he was incentivized to mate for life, because who the heck is going to go ask to marry a woman to the father and not be serious about it? Right?
Yeah,
Think about that. If he wasn't serious about building a life with your grandmother, then who the heck is going to go to a man and ask him? Because I read the book, ask him if he could marry his daughter. Now today in our value system, just to go on a date, I mean, or you know, like you don't, you know, we're not. It's not like I'm going to. I didn't go to my future wife's father the day that I met her, you know, and ask to go on a date, let alone asking to marry her. Now, I did ask
yeah,
actually to marry. I did call him like when we and asked his permission before I engaged. But the point, and that was me trying to like really look at the culture. But I want to pose that because I think it's interesting. The values of the time created an incentive. You know, you meaning the incentive against being a bad suitor. That's my proposition. Because had your grandfather, you know, who the heck is going to go to their future father-in-law and mess that up? No, they better be damn serious that they're going to get married.
yeah,
Now look and look, all these generations later, here you are talking to me on the Culture Matters podcast.
yeah.
So I
Mate, this was
that
supposed to happen. We were supposed to have a guy from Western Australia talk to a guy from Florida, and yeah, this is quite funny when you think about it.
so that's the wrench that I'm throwing in. And on part two, I want
Yeah,
to unpack the story of a father from Calabria that brought his I know at least at three sons at least. I know there were six children, and built a family culture that now a
yeah. So that
handful of
was
generations
Nonno's
later.
father. Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I was just saying that was Nonno's father. And then obviously I can touch on the marriage and all that. But yeah, it's a very interesting and heartfelt kind of life story. And yeah, I think it's amazing for us kids that he wrote the book, because we obviously have clear memories of like what his life was like. And I think writing things down is a very powerful thing, Jay. I think you know about that, and you can try to channel what you were thinking at the time, and it gives you an insight looking back at what was going on. Yeah.
In closing, for part one of the Culture Matters podcast, value investing, uh, what would you like the audience to take away from this conversation as it relates to starting their journey of investing into their life, their culture, investing?
Yeah. I think it's just important that obviously the listeners invest in their actual life and maybe go study rates in any form, um, whether that's Kobe Bryant or Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger. There's people out there that have done similar stuff to what you want to do, probably, and they have some amazing lessons for you about life and about their experience. I definitely think Charlie Munger's correct when becoming friends with the imminent dead. That's a very smart. I feel like there's a lot in that quote that they can teach you a lot of stuff about life, and that should be able to help you out in your life.